So it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out. I want to get into your career. I want to get into your book. And before I do that, I want to know, 4 years ago, everything changed for everybody because of this pandemic. And we were wrapping our heads around it in April of 2020. How did you get through that time period? And how did it change the way that you approach things?
Yeah, COVID really sapped my creative energy for a while. I had started working on this concept for Baby X, and my agent loved the idea, and I was supposed to just go off and write and figure it out. And then in March and April 2020, my kids' school shut down. I had no extra energy for creative project, and it just became kind of madness trying to keep our lives afloat. I also had a regular day job, and I actually I stepped away from writing altogether until about fall 2021. That's when I picked it back up again, and then what that finally gave me the fresh take on the book and how to get into it, and then I wrote it straight after that.
So how did that time away affect the vigor and the way that you approach writing as opposed to before? Was there a big change?
I think that for me, writing is not something I do every day. Unlike most writers that say they have to write a certain amount every
Yeah.
day. For me, it's really project specific. So this is my fifth book, and in between each book, I've taken off like 1 to 2 years where I don't even write a word of anything because I need to get the other book out of my head. I need to wait for something else to strike me. And so the process for this book of being away from it was helpful because I had been stuck in early 2020. I liked the concept of, you know, this new way to have babies and what that would mean for people and society and like some interesting stories that could come out of it. But I didn't have the right angle for this book yet. And I was frustrated because I almost felt like the concept was too broad and I couldn't figure out a way to concretize it with the right storylines. And I tried a few different ideas and none of them felt like big enough for a book. They were just short stories. And then when I came back at the end of 2021, um, another perspective occurred to me that I hadn't previously considered. And that unlocked a lot of the book for me because I could see how it would make the book a much bigger story than just a few little kind of dilemmas that my first version of characters were having.
The one thing that strikes me about Baby X is the idea of it's kind of that Orwellian idea that we've gone into. And I look at my lifetime and time span, and when I read those dystopian novels of how advanced technology came and how biology intersects that. But at the end of the day, I think a little bit of what I felt from this book, like with COVID, like as far as we've come as humans with technology, and as much as we can manipulate codes and do things to procreate, it all comes down to the elemental idea that we're human beings and we can't escape that. And it's always going to come down to the cellular level.
Yeah, I agree. And, there's a whole other side of this, whether you want to call it utopian or dystopian technology, which is gene editing to truly kind of get around that aspect of, well, we're just humans and we have our limitations and we're destined to, grapple with those limitations. If you were to go in a different direction with technology and write about gene editing for enhancement, that would bring up some other questions. For this book, I specifically stayed away from that technology because I don't believe that will ever be legal for embryos in particular to be fiddled with or enhanced. I think that's just a red line that society will keep. I think it is possible for disease eradication, but I think it's interesting what you're saying because even that very notion is something that's up for grabs potentially.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to get into kind of exactly what you do. Are you along with writing novels, are you a journalist? If I put you in front of a bunch of third graders at career day and one of the kids was curious and said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Yeah, so I was a journalist for about 10 years and I loved that work. I was reporting on all different kinds of stories, talking to scientists, covering emerging research, medical and scientific breakthroughs, ethical issues. and it was fascinating. But I eventually transitioned into a different aspect of the communications industry, and now I actually support a venture capital team that invests in new biotechnology. I'm their PR director. So I
Okay.
help get attention for the companies, the startups that my team's invested in when they have some important milestones that they reach in their research.
But do you feel as a writer penning these stories that you have more freedom than you would have as a journalist? Is there a part of that that you've,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I learned so much as a journalist from all the different stories I covered. I was editor in chief of this magazine for 5 years that was all about new biotech, up and coming developments. And we published around 100 stories a year, which, I obviously was the one in charge of all that. So I learned so much. And a lot of what I learned, I put into my book, just the little details
Uh-huh.
in there, like the biotech flowers that glow and the contact lenses, all that stuff. I did not make that up. That's actually stuff that's real now and being developed. I actually made up very little for this book. I just drew on tons of things that I had already been exposed to from my work.
So of all of these things that you've covered in the biotech world, what was the one thing that totally freaked you out? You had to kind of step away and say, wow, that's a lot.
That's a good question. I think when we start talking about brain computer implants and interfaces, that does freak me out a bit. I went to a conference for DARPA a few years ago, which is that arm of the government that develops really groundbreaking technology for military purposes. And they had a very rare showcase where they were kind of open to the public on what they were developing. And I went down to DC for that, and they were back then, like this was 5 or 6 years ago, already developing a brain computer interface that was non invasive. So you didn't need brain surgery to use it, but it was basically like a skull cap, and it would connect to, a computer and allow the person to kind of control whatever was going on the computer outside of them. But you could imagine how something non invasive and easy to access that has someone's brain waves kind of tapped into it would be potentially misused. And
Yes. I mean, it opens up that quagmire of AI right now, like, where it could potentially go. Because we all know that when humans get involved with it, there's always that potential that Arthur C. Clarke is waiting to write the addendum to the story.
it's true. I mean, AI is in its infancy right now. I actually interviewed one of the top AI researchers in the world last year who founded this company called Inflection AI. And now I think he just recently left to go work for Microsoft. But he said that in 10 years, what AI is capable of will be indistinguishable from humans. So, like, fully competent, capable, able to execute tasks, interact with the world in like very natural ways. And at that point, I don't know what we do or where we go from there.
I mean, there's going to be another ceiling, but yeah, however we can grapple with it. What I'm curious about in this realm of kind of medicine, science meeting technology is, and I guess this is more of a question for you. Are we going to get to the point where we can actually have an apparatus that's going to read our thoughts, where people can just we can transmit and do that without any problem?
Probably. I would not be surprised given the way things are going and how fast things are being developed. The brain computer interface space has been researched for many years already. And you only hear about things like Neuralink from Elon Musk, but there's others that are much farther ahead already. And give it another 50 years, I would not be surprised in the least if we were in that space already where we could just wear something and communicate.
But I mean, I can see that being something with someone in a comatose state that couldn't speak. But do you think that the regular civilian population should be walking around transmitting exactly what we're thinking all the time?
I mean, should is a different question than will be or will they be allowed to be?
Right.
right? They're all different questions. Like, should it be legal? Is it ethical? Are two different things.
Yeah,
And who decides those things and who bans it or who puts limits on it?
yeah,
Would I personally opt in? No. I think most
right.
of us say no, that's way too freaky. And talk about invasion of privacy. We already have very little privacy left today anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me go back to your childhood. Tell me where you were born and raised and how these seeds of being a writer and being interested in getting the story and making the story, how did all of this become a part of your DNA?
So I grew up in a small town in Southern California, Laguna Beach,
Okay.
and it was a very idyllic place to live. I was an only child, and I think I was pretty imaginative from the beginning. Wanted to keep myself amused and busy, and I used to come home when I was little and when maybe like second, third grade, and start writing stories just to entertain myself. I didn't have any brothers or sisters. I had friends at school, but at home there was a lot of time where I was just on my own, and that's how I started writing. And then I found that it was fun to do that, and it definitely gave me some kind of excitement that other activities in childhood really didn't awaken for me. So I started to see myself as a writer from a really young age. And then once I got into reading more complex books, I loved the feeling of being immersed in someone else's world. One that really changed everything for me was Gone with the Wind. I read it when I was 12, and that was the first time I had the experience of being so involved in a book that I just gave up whatever I was doing. I kind of fell away from the world and wanted to just be in this book. And I remember thinking, I want to be able to create that for somebody someday and be such a persuasive and entertaining writer that somebody wants to be in my world. And ever since then, I kept working at it. I kept writing. I kept trying to learn, took all the English classes that I could. In college, I actually realized I didn't love English classes as much as journalism because I wanted that practical skill set. And I also liked being out in the world, talking to real people and telling their stories, not just like analyzing literature and text. So I fell in love with journalism, and that was a great training for being a fiction writer
Yeah.
because you're just meeting so many different kinds of people and learning so many things in the real world. I couldn't imagine a better training ground for a fiction writer.
The other thing that really triggers our imagination are the movies that we see, and there's so many out there in the realm of like thriller, science fiction. What was the one seminal movie for you growing up that really left an impression?
God, there's a lot. I don't think anyone's ever asked me this question, so I don't have like a prepared answer. But one movie that comes to mind, or a couple that come to mind, the movie Contact with Jodie Foster.
Uh-huh.
She like discovers this other world, and it's all very realistically portrayed and kind of mind blowing. That one really stuck with me. And then the movie Minority Report was
Yeah.
a big one for me because it that was the essence of a bioethical drama. Can somebody be punished for crimes that they haven't committed yet? And then this like police force comes in and shuts them down before they've even done anything. That was super interesting to me. And Gattaca, people talk about Gattaca a lot in relation to my book. That was a great movie too. Same kind of thing. I love these sci-fi dramas. Those really stick with me.
I keep thinking about a movie. I mean, all of these things that we're talking about, there's a movie in my mind. I think it was Ethan Hawke, and it was this whole idea of predestination. When the baby was born, they could see their timeline, and then they would get placed in society based on this timeline that they could see. Do you ever remember a movie like that?
I don't think I saw that, but it sounds interesting.
I'm gonna find it and I'm gonna send it because it was so creepy and weird, but it was so spot on. It was like you could see that this person, this baby was gonna be a lawyer, or this baby was gonna be a trash collector, and it like herded the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and this whole thing was just kind of predestined. And it was like, oh my God, that's just like chilling. But I think Ethan Hawke was in it, maybe Uma Thurman. That might have been when they met. Anyway, I'll find it. But I
Okay.
keep thinking about that based on your storylines and what you've kind of experienced in your life. So I'm curious, what was the story that you wrote where you were like, you got a really good response, you saw the reaction on someone's face or a room where you're like, this is my life. This makes sense.
Like a journalism piece or just a short.
Anything in that early development of your writer brain where you got that acceptance, that BF Skinner moment where it was like, this feels good. This makes sense.
It was probably an assignment from like seventh or eighth grade. I think I had a teacher, a literature teacher back then who really inspired me. And I remember this assignment that was really enabled us as students to have to tap into our creativity as much as we were able to. And the assignment was to have characters from a few different novels that we'd read meet in a scene or a story. And I remember I put together, I think it was like Cyrano de Bergerac and someone from Les Miserables. I don't know, a few different books. And I had them meet in some scene and try to keep their characterizations consistent and whatever. I don't remember the story, but um, what I do remember is how entertained the teacher was,
Yeah.
that I leaned into that assignment and came up with something that was my own. And I just felt like, wow, maybe I can create something interesting and fun um, that other people will appreciate.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So let me ask you this, probably especially as a only child, you really had to hold on to heroes and people around you that were influential. Who was that hero for you that inspired you?
When I was younger,
Yeah.
hmm, that's a good question. I think I would probably say that teacher who I'm still friendly with today. She was the one who, I mean, I started with her, I think when I was 11 years old, and she was my teacher for sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And then I continued to work with her in high school, like tutoring and part time. But she was this amazing and brilliant literature teacher who was able to make these sophisticated works of literature feel relevant and compelling for young, pretty young kids. And it wasn't just like we were ticking boxes on some, worksheet. It was like, what are the profound themes that these writers were trying to convey and how could they relate to us? And the characters that we then met in some of these great novels, they weren't just, you know, theoretical to us. They were like people that we could try to live up to and learn from and hold on to. So, and then also poetry was a big part of the class too. So I think like I just learned so much from her. I really continued to look up to her. She was a seminal figure for me.
So, in a decade plus of being a journalist, you get this opportunity to interview and chase stories. What was the one interview for you where you grew the most? Or what was the story that you wrote, journalistically speaking, in that career that really you didn't expect it, but it made you grow in ways that was pretty magnanimous?
Hmm. God, that's a hard question. I'm trying to think back on like all the different types of stories that I wrote. I had so many beats that I covered over the years. I once was on like the police beat at the Daily News and crime. Like I've covered politics and for DC and oh, I know one. Okay, yeah, that reminds me. When I was about 21, I did an internship for a California paper called the Orange County Register in their DC office. So it was the DC editor and me, and we were the only two people in that office. And that was the summer that President Bush at the time issued his first veto of his presidency. And it was to
Yeah.
deny federal funding for stem cell research.
Hmm.
And I was there at the Rose Garden when he announced it, and I covered that for the paper. And I remember feeling, so I was always someone that was like excited about science and optimistic about the potential of science. I remember feeling very upset about that and angry
Yeah.
about it, but I had to be extremely neutral in my reporting and just convey the facts. And that experience really changed me because I realized that it wasn't just journalism that I wanted to do. I wanted to say something. I wanted to
Hmm.
be able to tell my own story about something like this that wasn't just, who, what, when, and where happened. And because of that experience, I was inspired to write my first book, which was called Living Proof. And it was about a world in which using embryos for research was outlawed. And, today we're basically seeing glimmers of that already.
That's interesting because that goes back to my previous question about what happened to give you this idea of wanting that freedom to do that. And that's
Yeah.
one of those moments. So I'm curious right now, I always think that journalism is kind of like people that get addicted to tattoos. Once you get one, you just want to get every single tattoo. You never ever escape the journalistic bug. When you have it, it's a part of your DNA. So right now in 2024, if you could meet and interview one fascinating human being on this planet and spend time with them, who would that be?
God, you have such good questions, and they're also really hard.
Well, I guess that's the part of journalism, just really kind of digging into
Yeah.
the marrow of it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Who would I interview? Um, one person I would love to interview and tried to interview and couldn't, um, and actually met in person and still couldn't get on her calendar is Jennifer Doudna.
Yeah,
She's the Nobel Prize winner who co-discovered CRISPR, the gene editing technology. And I find her to be a fascinating figure. I mean,
yeah,
she's already like written into the history books, but what she's enabled is an entire new era of medicine. And I would just love to talk to her more about kind of what led up to her discovery. How did it happen? Like, when did she realize how profound it was? What does she see it like leading to in the future? And I know she's gone on the record that she's had dreams about Hitler using gene editing technology for bad uses. So it keeps her up at night, like the misuse of what her discovery could allow one day.
yeah.
Uh, I just love to talk to her about how she thinks about all this.
So, your books obviously move people in various ways. What's one of your favorite fan letters, favorite responses from a reader?
I got one pretty recently from somebody that wrote to me and said, I never had an experience reading a book like this before where I was having so much fun reading it. And I didn't know that was possible reading a book. Probably someone who's not an avid reader, right? But somebody picked up the book and really enjoyed it and said they just really appreciated that I was able to give them this experience, this entertainment, and a new way of enjoying themselves with a book, and with fiction. So I think that's really gratifying to hear that somebody was, you know, had a new experience from reading something I wrote that was positive for them.
So let's say you have a dream tonight and you run into that version of you right before you take your first journalistic gig. And you can give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the stories you've covered, everything you've gone through, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you impart on that young version of you? And would they listen to you?
Hmm. I think I would be even more bold and aggressive in asking questions and challenging things that I saw. I think when I was younger, you know, I wouldn't I wouldn't want to be confrontational. I would just want to like ask questions but sit back and listen and maybe not be as much of a hard-nosed reporter. But I think that's where you get some really interesting stories and potentially scoops or learn things that were not necessarily public. So I think I would have tried to encourage myself to just be more fearless as a reporter. And, I'd always looked up to investigative reporting and the people who do that. And I actually have throughout my books sprinkled in characters who do that as well. But I myself was never an investigative reporter. I was more a feature writer and, writing about medicine and science, which is great. But I still kind of imagine there's another version of me somewhere that could have leaned more into that direction,
Yeah,
just more challenging the system.
yeah. So as someone that's obviously writing about, where we are technologically and biologically, scientifically speaking, where we are as a people, are you optimistic about the future? Do you worry about, I mean, there's these worries about AI and where we can go. And how it can, turn into a bad scenario. Are you optimistic? Are you realistic? Where are you at on that meter?
I think I'm more on the techno optimist side of things, as long as, you know, the people in charge in society don't mess everything up, because they could clearly go, too hard in the direction of shut it all down, and then we can't benefit from the potential that these technologies allow. Or if it's completely open-ended with like no guardrails or improperly addressed, then it gets into the wrong hands, and these tools are very DIY. So I do worry about things like that, that even with the rules and regulations that are possible, you can't really control who uses these things. So that worries me. But on the, in the big picture, I think society should be more on the side of, let's really try to maximize the benefits of these technologies, especially where biotech, tech, and AI come together. That's gonna be an unprecedented wave of progress for society, and really can allow like massive game-changing medical breakthroughs, productivity breakthroughs. I think those things will be fundamentally really good for humanity, as long as the flip side of it can be somehow dealt with. But I don't have the answers for that one.
The only thing that makes me nervous about it, because I'm an optimistic, my day job is an IT technician for a large school district. I've been in technology for a long time. The one thing that always kind of gets me a little freaked out is that I've seen two interviews with Elon Musk, and when he's asked about AI, the color goes out of his face, and he's just like, he just kind of nods his head. His nonverbals just pop out, you know, and he's on a pulpit of seeing and trying to innovate things that's a different level from us civilians. So
Yeah.
that's the only thing that kind of gets me like, huh, what kind of stew is he cooking that we don't know about? But I think it's just that elemental idea that humans can get their hands on things and it can go south fast.
Yeah, I agree. And I know he was part of that movement of tech leaders that was trying to slow down AI, and they were going to try to put a pause on it for 6 months. But of course, once the cat's out of the bag, no one's going to stop. That's just not happening.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. This is kind of a two-part thing here. Of all of the things that you've done professionally in your life, that's one part. And then the other part is journalistically speaking. What are you the proudest of?
Um, I think I'm proudest of my books out of everything that I've done, because those are the most personal and the most gargantuan efforts. I mean, each one is just a labor of love that takes so long, so many drafts, so much time alone in a room, kind of suffering to get it all out. And
Yeah.
I think that I've been able to write, 5 books at this point and have them published and out there in the world. I'm really proud of that.
So are you looking at any adaptations for film for any of your books?
So Baby X is currently being pitched around in Hollywood to showrunners and producers. So I have a film agent, and it's TBD. We'll see. I
Okay.
think there's potential, but you never know.
That's what pops out to me. That's why I asked it. It just seems like it's logical. So at the end of the day, you're the face behind all of these stories and words that you put out into the world, but you're running the show. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you're in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Regarding writing or
Just
life?
just in general, we all play these roles in life. So, whether you're a student or whether you're a journalist or whether you're a writer, whether you're a mother, whether you're a daughter, there's all of these people that have this idea of who they think you are. But you're driving the id, ego, and superego. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm someone who does wear a lot of hats. I have 2 little kids. I have a day job. I'm a writer. I'm a daughter. There's so much that I do in different ways to different people. For me, I think, and I was actually just recently reflecting on this, I think what rises above it all is that I'm someone who, I think I carry myself in a way that I can be proud of to the world, whatever my relationship is with the people I'm with, whether it's colleagues, friends, kids. I'm someone who I just want to be authentic. I want to be honest and have integrity and try to be brave when I have to be. And as long as I'm doing those things, I think I can, be proud of who I am, whatever my role is. And sometimes, that can be really hard to be, especially the brave part.
Sure. So let me ask you this. We get off the call here. A time machine pulls up in front of your house. You have a decision. You can either go into the future and see what's going on, or you can see one event in human history with your own eyes. You can witness it. Where are you going?
The future.
Okay. I had
Yeah.
a feeling. Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Baby X is the new book. Anybody that wants to get this, learn more about you, any of your previous books, anything that's going on in your world writing wise, where's the best place to go?
You can check out my website, which is just my name, kirapeikoff.com. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram.
Kira, this has been fascinating. Thank you. Thanks for opening up. Thank you for your story.
Yeah, thank you. Great interview.
Thank
Definitely
you.
the best one I've ever had. Honestly, great questions.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Best of luck with everything. And I hope I see Baby X on the silver screen.
I hope so too. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care.